This tutorial looks to the cleanup of the animation sequence that I've just created. Now, in the previous tutorial, I did touch on the jitter that the boiling has on the walk cycle I've created, and I did say that I'm not quite happy with that because it's a little bit too much, and there has to be a sense of control with that. Just again reflect on that one issue, I'm just going to scrub the timeline, and what I want you to do is keep your eye on the body itself where the issue was, and you notice that from frame to frame there is a huge amount of difference in terms of drawing for the body, which is natural because this was supposed to be a really quite a rough and ready drawing to work out the animation. And while when we play the animation, you don't see those huge differentiation between the drawing. You do notice the boiling that occurs, and that is the issue that we've got. Now, the funny thing about cell animation is that you can look at frame by frame and notice a huge amount of difference. You can play it quite fast and at sort of 24 or 25 frames per second, and you definitely will notice a lot of boiling if your lines aren't accurately worked out. And finally, when you are dealing with slowing it down a little bit, oddly enough, that issue somewhat dissipates. Now I'm just going to go to my X sheet and select all the frames. There you go. First frame selected, last frame with the shift key held down selected, and I'm just going to right click and say set the exposure to 2. Basically what I'm trying to do here is that I'm going to get each drawing for each of the frame to be exposed across 2 frames, basically doubling the length of the time that I have got worked out for this animation. And I'm just going to hit the play button. You notice that in fact the animation is a lot slower, a lot more exaggerated in a lot of ways, because nobody has that gate, the gate that we talked about in the previous lesson. But also I don't get the sense of the jitter being so prevalent because things are moving a little bit slowly, and therefore there's a bit more in terms of morphing happening that the eye doesn't really pick up. It is still there, I can still see it, but it's not as obvious as it was when we were running it in its true timing. So that's something to bear in mind. One of the things that most of my students come to me, especially when they go towards the second or third year, and they tell me that they want to work their animation to 24 frames per second, and we have this huge discussion around about the fact that, well, 24 frames per second may give you a lot of boil because it's so difficult to actually match all the movements together. This is the point in case. If you work out your animation at 12 frames per second and then capture each image in 2s, the issue of boiling becomes drastically reduced. So that's something that you need to bear in mind. Okay, we need to have a look at the cleanup. I've done 3 frames of the cleanup, and this is the first, second, and the third frame, and I'll go on to explain what I've done here, so we can actually examine it a bit better. Now, there was no kind of a huge amount of plan in terms of trying to figure out this character. I just drew it, and I drew it. The only plan that I kind of had at the back of my head was that I'm going to make it as complex as possible, more complex than I really needed to, just for us to examine what the payoff is going to be, or what the result is going to be. When you are looking at a majority of 2D animation, and I'll be showing examples of that, you notice that lines are much simpler, curves are a lot more cleaner, and therefore lines are almost always not weighted like these two lines are. There's a simple reason for that. It's because when it comes to cleanup and drawing of the character, it becomes a lot easier. It becomes a lot easier to control that boil. The moment that you add a lot of complexity, boiling is something that is inevitable and you can't get away with it. So for the next kind of part of this tutorial, what I want to show you is how we can actually reduce the boil even with something that's really quite complicated like this. Even though I will really advise you not to have a lot of detailing in your work for all the obvious reasons that I've just mentioned. So I'm going to pause this video and I'm going to connect my Cintiq to my laptop so that I can then go on to show you how we can actually proceed with creating a sort of a drawing for each cell that is a lot less has a lot less boil with it. Okay, now I've got my Backcom connected and I'm all set to go. I have got, I've put the cycle back to one drawing per frame, and we're just going to be examining these frames that we've got. So just so that we are a bit more clear on what we're seeing, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so that we can actually, in fact, I'm just going to click on it to get it a bit closer. We can examine. In terms of movement, I can see the past 3 frames I've got, but I can't see the one that's underneath, the rough animation that I've already created. So in order for me to do that, I'm just going to go to Auto Light Table, click that on to see the rough animation underneath. And just to examine this, I'm going to go to the first frame. I notice that that's my contact pose. The next frame, the body drops down a little bit and everything kind of shifts downwards a little bit as well. Then you go to the next frame. Again, the body kind of relaxes down a little bit further. And then the next one is where sort of real movement happens in terms of the leg kind of pushing backwards and the other leg kind of lifting up, etc., etc., in preparation for going into the passing pose. So looking at the elements of this, I noticed that the head is not really moving very much. The body is kind of already dropped down to a certain position. It's not going to go any further down. So really, this part and the head are pretty much going to be in the same space. Arms, different matter. The arm is going to be swinging backwards and upwards, etc., etc. The leg, again, a different matter. So we're just going to unpack this. I'm going to use my selection tool and I'm going to start selecting the upper torso, the entire upper torso. All right, so we've got this part and elements of this is already the arm is already been selected. I may not need the arm the way it is now, but I'm going to keep it because I can delete it later. At this stage, all that I need to do is simply copy this. So by right clicking, I can just go to copy drawing object and it just copies that bit that's been selected. I'm going to go to my next frame, which is frame 4. I'm going to right click and say paste drawing object, and that kind of pastes exactly what I wanted into the right frame. So basically, because there's going to be no changes in terms of movement or the body shape or anything, I can just simply select areas and copy and paste it. Like I said, what I don't need, let me just undo that. What I don't need is the lines that deal with the arm. So I can simply select and delete them. Okay, so that is all that I need from the previous one. If I want to, I can go back. In fact, let's try and do this. I can actually select the arm and the hand as well, again, but in a separate selection. So I'm also going to hold the shift key to see, oops, to see I can actually increase that selection. Let's do it. No, it is select that I'm looking for. Oops. Let's just see whether we can do a better job of making a selection here. There we go. I think what I ought to do is to just make a broad selection, and then anything I don't need I'm just going to delete in my next layer. So my syntax is beginning to play up a little bit, but it's okay. So I'm just going to go to what I've selected. I'm just going to go copy, go to my next layer, right click, paste. Now again, there are elements of this that I don't need, and I suppose bits have kind of laid over the top, which is okay. It really doesn't matter. But what I can do is sort of select bits that I don't need and simply delete them. And that arm in my drawing needs to be brought forward a little bit. So again, I'm going to select all the bits that I need and simply reposition it to what I think it should